All right, Chris Paul, Mr. CP3 has been on the trade rumor ever since he departed away from the Houston Rockets and onto the Oklahoma City Thunder. But the thing was, Sam Presti, they decided to keep him. They actually wanted to make a push to get into the playoffs. It actually happened, and it's a win-win because you get a bunch of first-round picks by trading away Russ. You bring in CP3, you increase his trade value, and now we're in the situation to where you have a bunch of contenders, let alone some desperate teams that are in a good need for Chris Paul, even though he is going to be worth $40 million dollars, and he's going to opt in pretty much for that second year. So you pretty much have 2 years left of CP3 for any type of franchise. We're going to jump here on The Jump on ESPN. This is my first time kind of covering on this show within this channel. I doubt this, actually, I pretty much kind of foresee this will be the last time, but I did come across a couple of trade scenarios they're going to throw out. So the show is a little more animated and goofier, so I'm probably not going to take them as serious as to be. But I wanted to kind of give my intake because we are approaching the NBA season next month on December 22nd, and we can expect through free agency and trades, Chris Paul is going to be out of Oklahoma City within this month. Personally, how I kind of see things, we've always heard about the New York Knicks are a desperate franchise for some type of direction. Now, I don't know what direction that means if you bring in Chris Paul, but they are desperate enough to bring him in. Now, we have heard from Chris Paul and his agent that he is looking to go to a winning contender, and he would prefer either in Los Angeles. So that kind of leaves the door towards the LA Clippers and the LA Lakers. Now, the Clippers are in demand for a point guard, as Kawhi Leonard has stated. Now, if they are going to bring in Chris Paul, they're pretty much going to have to deplete their bench and role players, and you're pretty much going to have Paul George, Chris Paul, and Kawhi, and the cap space is going to be filled up. You can go that direction if you want to bring in veteran-type players, but who knows where you need to be, because you can pretty much bring in a Rajon Rondo, who you can pretty much throw around $6 to $11 million per year instead and save money. But I'm not the Clippers. I don't know what direction they're going to go. A bunch of the role players pretty much have stated they don't want to come back. We'll see. For the LA Lakers, they could go that direction if they need more of rejuvenation and a reason why they need a repeat. So you can bring in Chris Paul. If you're going to trade away Danny Green, Kyle Kuzma, KCP, first-round picks, maybe you have to throw in Caruso. Some Laker fans want that, some don't. That's to be determined. But we all know there are other franchises like the Milwaukee Bucks. They're in a great position to land CP3. They do have the cap space and trade assets and first-round picks, and they want to keep Giannis Antetokounmpo. The New York Knicks, I doubt that's ever going to happen unless, if you're Sam Presti and OKC, if you get a bunch of first-round picks and a bunch of young cats, you can pull the trigger on that. But CP3 has made a note that he pretty much wants to sign off where he wants to get traded. So we're going to jump in here, and I'll kind of give my take on the trade scenarios and what I kind of foresee makes sense for Mr. Chris Paul.
Wanted to pick your front office brain, though, to evaluate a few potential trade destinations for Chris Paul. We all believe he is going to be on the move prior to next season, so we're going to give you a few potential deals, courtesy of our friend Tim Bontemps. Tim cooked all these up on the trade machine, and we want to ask you about the potential fit for CP. At the end, Amin is going to rank all the teams for us as well. So first up, the New York Knicks. Amin, your childhood team. You worked for this team. Fizz, you coached for this team. And here's what it would look like with Chris Paul playing for this team. Our Tim Bontemps provided this potential trade because the Knicks have so much cap space available.
All right, so pretty basic. The New York Knicks, they require Chris Paul easily, and the Thunder will acquire Dennis Smith Jr. Since it is in free agency time period in the offseason, it doesn't have to match cap space for 40 mil to 40 mil player to player. The New York Knicks, they do have the cap space flexibility, so they can just bring them in, like pretty much signing a free agent. If you're the Thunder to acquire Dennis Smith Jr., yo, this is a terrible hypothetical trade. If you're the Oklahoma City Thunder, you can rack up one first-round pick and maybe two second-round picks for Chris Paul in a trade and some young assets. Straight up for Dennis Smith Jr., no. Listen, if you're the Thunder, if you're trading with the Knicks, you have to tell the Knicks to throw in the first-round pick. You can bring in Mitchell Robinson. He can be part of a trade. Kevin Knox. I doubt the Knicks will throw in R.J. Barrett. That's completely fine. But if you throw in Kevin Knox, Mitchell Robinson, Dennis Smith Jr., and let's just say a first-round pick and a second-round pick. That right there is a pretty basic trade that you can go alongside with. Now, since the Knicks are in desperation mode, if you're the Thunder, you do have the advantage to where you could, ask them for more. But a straight up for CP3 and Dennis Smith Jr., that's an awful trade.
They could send Dennis Smith Jr. to the Thunder and just absorb Paul's contract. That's that simple. So, I mean, what do you think about his potential fit with the Knicks?
Awful fit.
And let me jump in real quick. If you were to get traded to the Knicks just in general, if you're Chris Paul, the Oklahoma City Thunder experiment did work out for you in your favor. Now, Chris Paul is 35 years of age, going to be approaching 36. That experiment did work because, and this is not me being petty, but this is straight up what happened. The Golden State Warriors, everyone was expecting them to make the playoffs. They were expecting Steph Curry to stay healthy and possibly Klay Thompson to come back. And again, you did have D'Angelo Russell and Draymond Green on the team. We expected the Warriors to be in the playoffs, but Steph Curry was out pretty much for the remainder of the season, so they got knocked out. The Portland Trail Blazers, their bigs with Zach Collins, Nurkic, and a couple other key players, they got injured, and pretty much pushed them back. We expected them to be higher in the playoff positions. That wasn't the case. But they actually squeaked out the 8th seed. The New Orleans Pelicans, Zion Williamson pretty much missed the first half of the whole season. And within that, we expected the Pelicans to make an 8th seed, but since he got hurt, they weren't able to make it. Basically what I'm saying is the Oklahoma City Thunder were not expected to make the playoffs. And as we kind of seen, if those teams never got hurt, and I think I'm missing one more as well up there in the mix. But basically, if you're the Thunder, that team is designed to where you can make the playoffs in the Western Conference if things go right your way. But it's also to where if you guys are in the 11th, 12th seed, they can pretty much blow it up. It's pretty much a momentum and a mentality basis for the Thunder. So Chris Paul, they got at a great moment, great momentum with the Warriors going down. The Pelicans went down. And then the Blazers were up in the air. That pretty much gave the Thunder leeway of jumping in. Credit, they did make the 5th seed. Kudos to them. They caught momentum at a great time. And pretty much everyone on the team and franchise knew that they could make the playoffs and they can make the momentum going. Now, if the other teams were healthy, that's not going to be the case. But kudos to Chris Paul. My point is, if he goes to the Knicks, I don't expect him to use that same type of energy and being a number one option to carry a load another season. I think it was like Russell Westbrook back into 2017. When KD left, Russ was focused for one season to pretty much pull up this superhero performance and will his team, into the playoffs. And we saw he averaged a triple-double. He won MVP, and he got to the first round of the playoffs. Chris Paul was very similar with this last season in 2020. But now entering 2021, he's not going to be able to replicate that again. He can, and let me repeat myself, he can do it with the Knicks in the East. But it's overwhelming enough to where you're not going to replicate it back-to-back seasons. So he's in a position to where he wants to go on a contender.
Awful fit on so many levels. Number one, the Knicks' whole thing in the summer of 2019 was, we missed out, but guess what? 2021, big free agents on the way. Let's keep that flexibility. So every deal they signed was like a 2-year deal or a 1-year deal. By doing this deal, they would basically say, you know what, never mind on 2021.
I mean, it is a whole new front office, though, I mean.
I know, I get it, but I think the plan, even though we may not have agreed what they did in the short term, in the long term, the idea of kicking the ball ahead to 2021, that's something that we can get on board with.
And if you're the Knicks and you bring in Chris Paul, and that's going to be a 2-year experiment, no other star player is going to join them. He's not going to mesh with a bunch of the younger cats on the team. It makes no sense for the franchise. I know the Knicks, they want to bring in a big name or something with the winning culture, but that's not the case. No one's going to join the Knicks to join Chris Paul on that franchise. I mean, the best you can get is possibly like a Carmelo Anthony for a last season. But besides from that, it makes zero sense. If you're the Knicks with the new management and new office and moving pieces, you want to rebuild for the future. You're not going to get big names. We've kind of seen that as evidence in the past. Even, with Kyrie, with KD, with Kawhi Leonard, you missed out on all those guys. Plus, you messed up. You messed that up. It's a toxic environment. So you got to build yourself from the down all the way to the top. And, if players start seeing that they can start having a rebuilding franchise, that they can bring themselves back up into fruition, then some players in the future could possibly join. But if you're the Knicks, you're not going to get Giannis and these big names in 2021. So you got to keep your young guys. You got to go through the draft, and you got to find a young player to be on your team. I don't know who that is. They pretty much missed on every opportunity they had. And if I'm the Knicks GM, I have no idea what direction they go. You're not going to make the playoffs for the next 5 seasons.
When you talk about Chris Paul at his age and that salary over the last couple of years of his deal, it just doesn't fit up with the timeline the Knicks are on. And then from Chris Paul's perspective, what am I going to do? I'm going to go to a team and help them be an 8 seed and get swept in the first round? That's not what he's looking for at this point in his career.
Well, it's absolutely right. I wouldn't wish Knicks on my man Chris Paul, not at this stage of his career. Come on, man. You talking about a vet who's obviously going to be a Hall of Famer, a team that's on a rebuild, guy looking to, secure his legacy even more by winning a championship. Terrible fit, just like Amin said.
Well, I think ultimately, you can't try to go big game hunting all the time. You may plan for 2021 and think, I got this money and we're going to go, but that doesn't mean you're going to get the guys. I went through it. Mm-hmm. And so I think the Knicks have to be open to a lot of different things. Would he be a great fit for them? Absolutely. I think he would fit those kids. Mitchell Robinson going to the rim.
No, sir, Mr. David Fizdale. Listen, we all know David Fizdale was the head coach for the New York Knicks, and that was atrocious. He could not even bring up a starting lineup that made sense on the group. He did not develop the young cats. He started to bench Dennis Smith Jr., and that player progression was terrible. So I don't want to hear from Mr. Fizdale on that. Chris Paul will be a terrible fit for the New York Knicks.
Some more spacing and some shooting. Absolutely, he would fit. The big stage, he doesn't get sick. But for him,
Paul Pierce and Emil on the right, straight as face as ever, saying this guy is crazy. He got fired for a reason.
And where he's at in his career, I'm just not sure that that's a good fit for him and what he's trying to do, which is win big.
Having been through it, having been trying to get big free agents to come and have them not land, do you think, Fizz, that the Knicks should change their mindset a little bit and operate almost more, I don't want to say a small market team, but a team that isn't expecting to get a lot of free agents, so they do have to acquire big name players through trade?
Yeah, and I think you have to develop with R.J. Barrett. He needs to be your cornerstone foundation. You really got to develop him. Mitchell Robinson is a great glue piece on your team and franchise. He's 23 years of age. Develop him as well. You need a true point guard for your franchise. I believe Dennis Smith Jr. can be that guy. They just need to develop him and trust him. He was a beast when he was on the Dallas Mavericks. I would keep Dennis Smith Jr. really progress him. I would be fine enough to even put him as your starting point guard. He does have star talent on him. You just got to give him the opportunity. Kevin Knox, he's kind of up in the air. I would still keep him on your franchise. You can have a starting lineup of Dennis Smith Jr., R.J. Barrett, Kevin Knox, Julius Randle, and Mitchell Robinson. That's what David Fizdale should have done from the jump. But he started to pretty much start Elfrid Payton with Taj Gibson and, just I think Maurice Harkless at times, just pieces that made zero sense. If you have a bunch of young cats, you develop them, and you got to give them minutes. That's going to be your core foundation. I think with the New York Knicks, you're going to have to make a trade to where you got to let go of Kevin Knox and Julius Randle, and you got to bring in, a true shooting guard or a wing. That's a young cat, but I can't really think of any right now in high demand in the market. But besides for New York, you just got to keep it going, player progression, going through the draft. You're not going to pick any big names in free agency, let alone for a trade. If you do a trade for a big name, it's not going to make sense for a timeline because you want to bring someone who's around 23 to 25 years of age. You want to develop that team. You don't want to bring a star like Bradley Beal at 27, 28. You're just going in circles.
It's like this.
Well, I just think you got to be, meticulous about building your team and not think that you're just going to land this big shark all the time. And so if you can acquire winning pieces along the way that fit into the mentality you're trying to build into your team, the type of guys you're trying to bring into your culture, you snatch them up when you can. And if a big fish is out there, yeah, you take them, but that shouldn't knock you off of what you're trying to do. Or if you see opportunities to improve your team along the way till 2021, you should take those opportunities.
Well, I mean, certainly we saw what Chris Paul can do with young players, the way he mentored those guys in Oklahoma City. I mean,
One thing, Rachel.
That was a completely different situation with Chris Paul and the Thunder. That team actually fit around surrounding CP3 as the main guy. And you did have Steven Adams as well, who's becoming somewhat of a veteran in the league. Now, if you go to New York, that's a toxic environment. These players don't even have their own name out there. They're not that good. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was a very underrated player. He is going to progress. Dennis Smith Jr., we've seen what he can do with Atlanta. Steven Adams has been in the conference finals with Kevin Durant on the Thunder. With New York, nothing.
Not the New York players.
Exactly. You got to have a plan.
I think
you got to have a plan.
I think that I disagree with him because I think his position.
You coach those players.
Well, his position fits the young players that they have.
Right.
Mitchell Robinson needs a Chris Paul. R.J. Barrett needs a Chris Paul. Kevin Knox needs a Chris.
Chris Paul is not in that position to repeat what he did from last season. With Chris Paul, the reason why he stuck it out with the Thunder for that one season, because after the Houston Rockets lost in Game 6 of the semis to the Golden State Warriors, James Harden and everyone threw Chris Paul as a scapegoat. And Chris Paul's overall pretty much went down based on everyone's opinion. I've always stated Chris Paul is a great veteran player. I want him on my team and franchise. He did have a big contract, but Chris Paul was just fed up with James Harden when he was hogging the ball for 20 seconds a game, who pretty much diminished Chris Paul as an off-ball player, and everyone else just to watch him skedaddle and shoot a fadeaway step-back three contested. Chris Paul was done with that nonsense. He had to join the Thunder and be the number one guy to prove and show everyone that he is that impact player, and he made everyone look foolish out there.
Paul. And so, because of the position placement, that's why I say he could end up, especially in the East, in the bottom of that East, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
He could squeak them in probably if they add a couple of little things here and there. But for him, I just don't think it's the right move for what he.
Chris Paul's not going to put that load management on himself. He already did it with the Thunder, successfully went to Game 7, and you don't want to touch that ever again. You don't want to go to the Knicks and try to replicate it. It's not going to work. It's probably going to be more chaos, and then your overall value goes down. If you're Chris Paul, you want to go on a contender. You want to be a second option, maybe even a third option. Ideally, I think the best fit for him would be the Milwaukee Bucks. I believe that's the same best timeline for him and Giannis Antetokounmpo based on his free agency decision, let alone with Chris Paul. And you're both in high demand for a championship, let alone a finals appearance. There's really no other team and contender that can take on the cap space. If you're the Clippers, I doubt that can be the case if you're going to blow everything up to bring the big three. If you're the Lakers, you can make that actually go down. You can make that go down with. If you want to let go pretty much majority of your guys off the bench and retool, the Lakers could do that. They're not desperate enough to do it, but that's probably your best bet besides from the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, another one for a contender that kind of makes sense would be the Philadelphia 76ers. You do have Doc Rivers on your team. He did coach Chris Paul, which is not really, I don't think it's really a positive, but the Sixers are in a high demand for a true leader on their team and franchise. Now, you would have to give away Tobias Harris and Al Horford and Josh Richardson and a couple a first-round picks to the Oklahoma City Thunder. I believe if you're Sam Presti of the Thunder, you take that deal. Tobias Harris, you can use him for around 2 seasons while they develop Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and bring in draft picks. Al Horford, you can pretty much kind of suck it up for a season or two and try to make a trade later on because you do have your picks. But if you're Philly, I believe it's a great decision if you bring in Chris Paul. You need to move Ben Simmons to the 3 or the 4. I've always stated this. If you bring Chris Paul in your franchise, with him, Joel Embiid, and Ben Simmons, and if you can just bring in some veteran shooters off your bench, that team would fit and it would be ideal. That's the direction I think Philly should go for, since you do have Daryl Morey as your new president of basketball operations, and he likes to make big moves for big names. He did bring Chris Paul back in 2018. I think he would be able to do the same because Philadelphia, you're not going to bring really any other big name. You know, you can probably bring a smaller name like a Buddy Hield or a, just, I don't know, some players like that. But if you're Chris Paul, I think the Lakers should be number one on your radar. The Milwaukee Bucks, the 76ers, and I'm probably missing one more team out there, but I'll probably remember as we go along.
Trying to get out of his career.
All right, well, this group could definitely have this conversation for the entire rest of the show. We're not going to do that. I'm going to move on. The next trade destination possibility, the Milwaukee Bucks, to help you imagine that at home. Here's what it would look like. Chris looks snappy there.
Yeah, before the trade goes down, Milwaukee's going to have to give away Eric Bledsoe, Dante DiVincenzo. I'm trying to think of other cap space guys. I think Ersan Ilyasova would have to be there for like $8 million. You're going to have to give around probably 2 first-round picks because you're always it's pretty much going to be from 27 to 30. And you want to bring in, Giannis to stay there for a reason. So you may have to bring in another player, another young guy within that. But besides that, that should get the deal done if you're the Thunder, most likely. But I think it works out more for Milwaukee, not the Thunder.
Tim Bontemps again with the potential trade. Chris Paul for Eric Bledsoe, Ersan Ilyasova, whose contract has to be guaranteed, Robin Lopez, whose option would have to be picked up, and DJ Wilson to make the salaries match. So, Amin, what do you think about CP3's potential fit with the Bucks?
Yeah, I think it would be a great fit. CP3, as I stated, he needs to be on a contender. He needs to be a second option, and he needs the ball in his hands. If you're Giannis, you finally have a player that is, a veteran leader who demands a championship, let alone to go to the finals or deep in the playoffs. So that pretty much Chris Paul would be a great floor general, both in the locker room. He'll be a great, voice out there for any of the young guys. If Chris Paul's on your team and they're going against the Miami Heat, they're not getting swept like that, or gentleman's sweep at least. I think Giannis, that would be a great fit alongside with him, with Chris Middleton as well. That would be a great core 3 on your franchise. If you're Milwaukee, you have to make that deal. If you're Milwaukee, number 1 should be Bradley Beal. I doubt they'll even have the assets to get him. But number 2 should be Chris Paul. If you're the Thunder, ideally you can get better and younger pieces for Chris Paul. I wouldn't want Eric Bledsoe on your team being around 28, 29. Timelines don't match up for the Thunder, but may have to bring in a 3-team trade. But CP3, with his timeline of pretty much a year or 2 left of his contract, fits very well with the possible direction or misdirection of Giannis and the Bucks.
I think it was a much better fit. They have a need for someone who can create offense not only for himself but for others. I think Giannis in the playoffs, we've seen the offense get stagnant and it's harder for him to get the buckets that he's accustomed to getting. I think Chris Paul helps with that. I think him being a strong voice and a leader on the court is important for them as well. Look, for every single one of these scenarios, we're going to have a conversation about his age and his contract.
Right.
But if you're Milwaukee, here's the deal. You want to demonstrate to Giannis Antetokounmpo that we do whatever it takes to get a championship. And so that even means inheriting a contract that really doesn't look great from our books perspective, but it helps our chances to get you over the hump. And much like I think about Oklahoma City a few years ago, trading for Paul George and Carmelo Anthony, even though those guys weren't the best fit, what it did was it demonstrated to Russell Westbrook, we're all in here in OKC. I'll sign that extension. And really, mission accomplished from that standpoint.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Again, the contract doesn't matter. It fits the timeline with Giannis and, either if he leaves or stays or signs up 1 year again. But timeline's still fine enough. I mean, even if Giannis does leave after the 2021 season and Chris Paul opts in because he wants to make $40 million, you can still make a trade for Chris Paul, or let alone you can just, you can waive him and just play it out, or, but you're not going to keep him on your team.
The fit is.
I think it's a great fit. I mean, he checks 3 boxes for Milwaukee. Playmaking, which they desperately needed because Giannis did most of the playmaking for the other guys. Leadership.
And real quick, Giannis is not a playmaker. He doesn't have a pull-up jumper. He doesn't even have a three-point jumper that's consistent. He's not KD. With Giannis, it's very slow with his jumper, and it doesn't go in. It doesn't look good, or doesn't even flow at all whatsoever. You need a playmaker out there. Eric Bledsoe he's an okay playmaker, but he kind of reminds me a little bit of Patrick Beverley on the offense, just better, of course. You need a true point guard, a true floor general, and Chris Paul. And Chris Paul's never played with a star wing player like this. So Giannis is going to benefit a lot.
And then you got a closer. People forget Chris Paul was one of the best fourth quarter players and
He's the best clutch player, yeah.
in the league last year and in his career. And that's something we didn't see from this ball club in Milwaukee. So he checks those 3 boxes for me, and he puts them back in serious championship contention.
Yes,
Not that they weren't last year, but, you know, a lot of people had them getting upset, when which they did. But you put Chris Paul in that team, I like them coming out of the East.
Yeah, I'm not going to let David Fizdale talk.